Discover how to buy a good business at a great price in today's session with Richard Parker.
Welcome to Awakened Titans podcast with Lily Patrascu. Mind-blowing conversations with influential business titans sharing how you can manifest abundance, love, joy, success through quantum awakening, quantum manifestation, quantum healing, quantum miracles, exponential business growth, and innovative products and services.
Richard Parker has been helping people achieve their dreams of owning a business for over 30 years. It's hard to believe because he looks so young. His How to Buy a Good Business at a Great Price program has sold over 100,000 copies in more than 80 countries. He was a partner with Ray Dalio and the Dalio family office for 4 years in an investment firm that was set up in order to mentor one of Ray's sons in the art of buying businesses. He has personally purchased 13 of his own companies, plus one co-investment, with purchase prices ranging from $50,000 to over $200 million. Richard has appeared in Forbes, the New York Times, TheStreet.com, Entrepreneur Magazine, Incorporated, and has over 200 published articles to his credit. First question is, what's the secret to your success?
Well, thank you for having me, and I appreciate the comment related to age. It's very nice. Maybe you might need a pair of glasses, but and again, thank you for having me. So it's a great question. I don't, hard to probably identify it into one sentence, but as I think about it, I would say probably tenacity, not giving up. I mean, in the life of an entrepreneur. And anybody in business, and to me, anybody who's in business is an entrepreneur, regardless of whether you own several companies or one. And so to me, it's, tenacity and really embracing uncertainty. I mean, because there's so many times that you don't know what's around the corner or things come your way you don't plan for. That's just the life of business. And so I think keep sticking with it and embracing the uncertainty and being able to deal with it in a good way whenever those challenges and the valleys come along is what I would identify as the underlying secret to my success.
Thank you. How did you awaken to your personal power? And how did that lead on to you starting to buy businesses?
Well, it was from a tremendous failure that I had. I was working for a company. I was 29 years old. I was making a very good living. I was running one of their divisions, and I $60,000 in the stock market. I made $72,000 that year as my income. And I was 29 years old, dug myself into a terrible hole. I had first child on the way, and now a 4 and 1 grandson. And I was really in a terrible financial situation, and I couldn't really change jobs because I was already overpaid for what I was doing, and recognized that so it's like I didn't have any leverage. And so I realized that I've got to put myself in a position where I don't have a limit to my upside, because if I wanted to recapture that money, and I'd worked very hard, I was pretty young, I'd saved up about $90,000 in total, and I blew 60,000 of it, and said, if I'm going to be able to recapture that money, I've got to put myself in a position where there's no limit on my upside. And so quickly realized that the best way to do that would be to either start a business or get into my own business. I started something quite small, but quickly, within a few months, realized that the best way for me to grow the business would be to acquire other similar businesses and tack them on. And that started me down the road of acquiring businesses. And it was really from just a stupid mistake that I made as an investor. I couldn't call myself as a terrible investor with a lack of information, made a dumb mistake and realized I had to recuperate from it. So, one of the lessons is when you don't have a lot of options, it's very easy to make decisions, right? And so that's how that came about.
Thank you. What are the biggest misconceptions entrepreneurs have when wanting to buy a business?
I think one of the top level misconception is they don't think they can do it. That this is reserved for either wealthy people or big companies, and nothing could be further from the truth. This is very doable. It's doable from a standpoint of finding a business. It's doable from a standpoint of financing the acquisition, investigating the acquisition, closing the transaction, and of course, operating the business. But it's a belief in yourself, and also to understand that this, in fact, is very doable if you equip yourself with the right information and knowledge and align yourself with some good mentors, especially if you haven't done it before.
Thank you. How do you define a good business in terms of acquisition? What criteria should buyers prioritize?
Well, the number one thing is for a good business is to make sure that it's the right business for whoever is going to buy it. So you can have a good business with solid fundamentals, good financials, a good customer base, good growth potential, stability. But if it's if it's not the right individual who acquires that business, meaning you marry your greatest skill set with what that business needs to drive the revenue and profits of the business, then that becomes a bad decision. So a good business, because there's lots of good businesses run by the wrong people. And similarly, there's lots of good businesses that if you take it over and you're not run well and you're the right person to run it, it can flourish. So the important foundational thing is that the business has to be right for the individual, and that defines a good business.
Thank you. How do you determine what criteria should make me, for example, the right person to buy a particular type of business?
What I like to teach people, and I've been doing it for many, many years, is the first thing you need to understand what your greatest strengths are and what your weaknesses are, because this is not like going to get a job where you can fudge your weaknesses a little bit until you find your way. I mean, this is your at stake. So the first thing, what I like to tell people to do is put together your 5 golden rules for what a business must have in place for it to be the right business for you. And the 5 golden rules could evolve, because when you first start out, you don't necessarily know what they are. But to give you an example, for myself, my 5 golden rules are: I want a business that's sales and marketing driven, because that's my greatest strength. The second thing is I want a business with high margins, because if the business has high margins, I'm not worried about the revenue, because I count on my first skill set. And eventually, as long as I build the revenues, because of good margins, the business will be profitable. I like a business that has demand in place. I don't want to create demand. I like a business that doesn't compete on price. And I like a business that has some element of exclusivity, either in the territory or the product. So those are my 5 golden rules. Your 5 golden rules will be different depending on your skill set. But it's very important to have those crystallized. And sometimes it takes a little bit of time. You have to look at different businesses, speak with owners, speak with other people who've bought similar businesses that may not be for sale, but are in a similar industry, to get your 5 golden rules together. And that's the ultimate litmus test to make sure that the business subscribes to it. Like, I would never buy a business that doesn't subscribe to all 5. Like, not 4, it's got to be all 5.
Thank you. Considering that other entrepreneurs have different skill sets, what should they look at in terms of determining their own 5 top things?
Well, one of the things is, generally speaking, people have a reasonably good idea of what they're good at. It doesn't mean what job that you've necessarily done. So one thing just to point out, people often confuse experience with expertise. And by that, I mean, just because you've been working in a certain industry, that's experience. Expertise is what you did specifically in that job, in that industry, and did it carry over to other industries. So the first thing is identifying what you believe to be that expertise. And sometimes you need to speak to coworkers, speak to people that have, colleagues, bosses, etc., to help you identify what that greatest skill set is. And you have to be open-minded. You want people to really hammer away at you, because very often what you think you're good at is what we typically like to do. That doesn't mean that that's what you're best at. So really drilling down to that, being very honest with yourself. This is not the time to sell yourself. This is time to be brutally honest with yourself of what is that greatest skill set, that one shining component to your attributes and what you could lend to a business. So it's an evolution. Generally, people have a bit of an idea, but you really, really want to double click on that to make sure you're seeing yourself the right way. And very often people are too harsh on themselves. Like, they don't think they're good at something, where a coworker or a boss would tell them, this is what you're terrific at. So really again, the key is being very open-minded, not confusing experience with expertise, because one is something where you worked, another one is what you did.
Thank you. What are the top mistakes entrepreneurs make when trying to buy a business?
One of the big ones is thinking you're going to buy a business for no money down, because there's a lot of bad information, misinformation, inaccurate information on the internet of people, promoting these ideas of buying these incredibly profitable businesses for no money down. It doesn't happen. It doesn't take anywhere near the money that people think that it, or may think that it does. But buying a good business does require some equity. The other thing is that, which we talked about, is of course making sure it's the right business. The third part, and this is a bit of a hump for some would-be entrepreneurs, is understand there's no perfect business. Every business has warts and blemishes, and they're going to have some problems. You want to be able to solve for that. You want to make sure it's not such a big problem that the company is going to go out of business, like, customer concentration, where they have, 60% of their business with one particular customer. There's no perfect business. However, the beauty of buying, if you look at a startup, it doesn't have any of those blemishes because you haven't done anything yet. So people get delusional and think, oh, it's maybe a startup is better, but you don't have anything. All you have is this, glorified plan. You have no customers, you have no revenue, you have no employees, you have no systems, no processes. You're buying existing businesses. All those are in place. You theoretically should get the keys on Monday and take a paycheck on Friday, but there are going to be blemishes and warts, and you have to solve for them. And some of them you can't. You just have to make sure that they're not the type of blemishes or problems that are going to put you out of business. So I'd say those are really the top three, as far as first thing being, the right business, making sure we talked earlier, getting knowledge and information and aligning yourself with people and potentially mentors that can help you. And the third piece is understand there's no such thing as a perfect business.
Thank you. What's the difference between buying a business and starting one from scratch? Which is better?
Well, for me, I'm the buy a business guy. And just as we just mentioned, when you buy a business, you get the keys on Monday, you should take a paycheck on Friday. There's revenues, there's employees, there's customers, there's suppliers, there's processes, there's systems, there's marketing. You have a track record. When you evaluate the business to acquire it, you could look at historical financial information to determine the stability of the business, because the immediate past will give you some indication of the immediate future, right? And so you can get a much more a clear picture of what this business can look like in the future based on what it has looked like in the past. And so you have a solid, stable foundation upon which to build, as opposed to a startup where, everything sounds great, but you have nothing. You don't even have paper clips. So every idea sounds wonderful, but nothing, absolutely misproven. And the majority, the failure rate of startups is enormous. You hear different numbers, but it's typically about 96% of them fail in the first 5 years, a lot of them because they run out of capital. Now, with all that said, for individuals that are looking to get into business, they may not be able to take the road of full-time buying a business. As for someone who wants to create some additional revenue or wants to stick their toe in the water related to entrepreneurship, and it becomes more, it's just more accessible financially, a startup can be fine for them. But by and large, if you want to get into something robust and do this full-time, buying a business, in my opinion and my experience, infinitely outweighs a startup.
Thank you. How do you leverage the pain point of the business owner who is selling the business to you in order to get a great price?
That's a fantastic question, because the answer to your question is in your question, meaning it's the pain points, to be able to extract those and find out what's really important to the owner. For some owners, it's just about the money. They want to make sure they get the right deal and they're leaving. For other ones, it's related to legacy. You have to be able to, the way you get the answers to that is by not going into any conversations or discussions like a bull in a china shop. You want to establish a nice, meaningful relationship with the seller. Good conversations. Don't worry about the negotiations, the pricing, any of that. I don't even pay attention to the asking price. You want to have good conversations with the sellers. Find out what is important to him or her. Is it related to the money? Is it the down payment? Is it taking care of their employees? Is it perpetuating their legacy? What looks like the best deal for them? I've seen it repeatedly where a buyer with a lower offer than other ones gets the transaction over and over again because they have this terrific relationship with the seller. Keeping in mind, the seller has put their blood, sweat, and tears into this business. And so very often they want to see that continue. And they would like to see the business turned over to someone they're confident in, especially if you're going to get them to finance part of the purchase. So establishing that relationship and not going in there guns a-blazing, just to really have a good, meaningful, don't have to worry. You'll get to all the details. That's going to happen by default. But just really have just nice, solid conversations. And the more you do that, the more open the seller will become and they will tell you what their pain points are before you even have to probe to find out. I mean, just because of the nature of the conversation and relationship.
Thank you. How do you determine a business really has a good price?
Well, there's the math part, which is it should be a multiple of earnings that make economic sense compared to other investments that you can make. Right? So that's the math part. That's science. That's easy. The remaining parts of valuations are sort of a little more artistic. And very often, I've taken the approach very often with sellers is, look, I'll pay your price. You take my terms. Meaning getting a massive seller note, not having to put as much money up front, being able to leverage any additional capital they have to put into the business. And so the deal comes in the terms. You know, there's always a good business. You're not going to steal a good business, but a good business, when you get to be able to get to a great price, is very often lies within the terms. And that could be seller notes. That could be earnouts, meaning the seller only gets a certain percentage of the valuation of the business as long as the business continues on this certain trajectory. So the value really becomes in the terms. And that's where you can negotiate a great price.
Thank you. How do you become, as the buyer of the business, the exact solution the seller of the business is looking for?
You ask really good questions. The solution, to become the solution is what we talked about earlier, is establishing a good relationship with the seller. And for them to finally get to the point of seeing you as the buyer, as their vehicle to exit their business. So whatever is important to them, if they want to stay on, for example, you have a lot of people, they own a business and they think they want to retire. And as they start going through this process, they realize, what the hell am I supposed to do afterwards? Like, I have my whole meaning for getting up in the morning is my work. And so very often they want to stay on board for an extended period of time or have a place to hang their hat. You know, and so being able to keep them involved in the process, that's very often a hot button and that sometimes comes only later down the road when they start to realize, oh my God, you know, that I'm getting closer to the closing date. And so having those, you know, getting those understanding of what they really want to do and being able to satisfy that. If you address the seller's needs related to whether it be purchase price, the down payment, what they want to do, what's important to them related to perpetuating their legacy, if as soon as the seller says, that's the person I want to buy my business, then the deal terms are yours. That's the goal, is get them to make that decision that this is the person I want to sell my business to. And that only happens with human interaction. And I see it where buyers will send me an email saying, I'm trying to buy this particular business. The seller and I have, you know, them a bunch of times. I'm not getting the answers. Now they're slowing down, whatever. And said to them, how often have you met with them face to face? Well, they're, you know, 80 miles away and, you know, get in your car and go sit with them and keep doing that if you have to every day until you have these conversations, because that's the way you can establish a relationship via email or by cell phone. You need to sit in front of the seller and start to establish that human relationship so that they don't just see this as nothing more than a business transaction. It's got to be, you know, there's relationships and then there's other personal relationships. You want to marry those two.
Thank you. How do you make sure you don't get gazumped? As in, like, how do you make sure that another better offer doesn't come for the seller at the last second that kind of takes away all of this effort you're putting into establishing yourself as the only choice?
You have to get used to making offers. Get comfortable making offers. Letters of intent and early offers could be structured. They're non-binding upon, very often they're not binding upon the buyer. They can be binding upon the seller because you want to tie up the price and terms. But you cannot be afraid to make offers. When you find a business, the deal flow, getting good businesses, is the biggest problem in the world of mergers and acquisitions, buying businesses, whatever terminology you want to use. And that's from buying a dry cleaner on Main Street right up to $1 billion company purchased by private equity or institutional investors. Deal flow is always tough. So once you learn how to buy a business, educate yourself, you have a couple of conversations with the sellers, don't be afraid to make offers. You've got to make offers. The first one is always hard. You're nervous, whatever, but you've got to make offers. So once that business becomes of interest, and even if you don't have all the information you necessarily need to make a decision, buy up the business. Put in an offer, get an LOI signed. You always have language. You put language in there to make sure you could walk away from the deal for any reason or no reason, but get it tied up so you completely eliminate the possibility of someone coming in from the back door and throwing in a better offer. You've got to move quickly. And so, because there's a lot of people looking for businesses and there's not a lot of good businesses relative to the amount that people are looking. So you've got to be educated. You got to learn how to do this so you could move quickly when the right business, a good business, comes across your desk.
Thank you. What are some red flags that indicate a business is overpriced?
Well, the first one is related to multiples. The math has to work. It has to make sure it's a meaningful, it makes sense relative to other investments. The other thing is when the business has not shown stability or steady growth. If the business is in any type of decline, then you have to decide whether or not that makes sense to buy altogether. Overpriced businesses are businesses, for example, where there's customer concentration or supplier concentration, meaning a disproportionate amount of revenue comes with too few clients, or it's entirely reliant on one supplier that could go out of business tomorrow. Businesses where specific employees hold too much power. When you take over, you're too reliant on specific employees, or there's a barriers to entry, meaning you don't really have anything, that it's very easy for someone else to come into the business. Now, one thing people should understand is, for the most part, every single business is overpriced when it first comes to the market. It's natural. People are putting their business up for sale. Propensity is to overprice the business. Don't pay any attention to the asking price, none whatsoever. The buyer determines the valuation, not the seller. So sometimes I know people, well, the seller's going to get insulted by my offer. Go ahead and insult them. If they're pricing their business, if they put out their business at a ridiculous price, it's almost insulting to you that they've done that. So go ahead and insult them back. There's no problem. You could always do it in a good way. It's just the business has to make sense, economics from a valuation standpoint. I see you're laughing, so you think the insulting piece, right?
Thank you. How can buyers avoid emotional bias and remain objective when buying a business?
Critically important. As soon as you start to go off the reservation related to emotion, you're cooked. So it's okay to have an element of emotion, to be excited about the process, but you have to have a combination. The two, you want to be excited and scared. The excited part is going to keep you going because it's not just, it's not always easy going through the process of buying business. The scared piece is going to force you to be diligent. And so certain things where buyers, if you find yourself falling in love too much with the product versus the profit, if you find yourself thinking about, here's all the wonderful things that I'm going to do once I take over the business, those are warning signs that you're going down the path of emotion and it's the wrong path. It's okay to remain excited. You want to remain excited. It keeps you going, but your combination has to be 80 to 90% logic and 10 to 20% emotion. And as soon as you find yourself hallucinating about all these wonderful things you're going to do about the business or other things along those lines, you've got to rein yourself in, because that's when you start making stupid decisions. For example, sometimes when people say, I think I'm going to go through with this because I've spent 3 months with this company and I've spent so much time already that no. It doesn't matter how much time you spent with it. If it's not the right decision, it wasn't the right decision then. It's not the right decision now. You have to have the fortitude to walk away, because sometimes the best deals are the ones you don't do.
Thank you. What due diligence processes do most buyers overlook?
The biggest thing they overlook is they pay way too much attention to the financials. Now, I know someone who's listening to this for the first time might say that sounds a little crazy, but hear me out. The financials are math. They're numbers. Numbers don't lie. People lie. So the numbers are, or they aren't. That's it. That's the easiest part to do. You could do part of it yourself, bring in a CPA, an accountant, and they'll be able to go through the financial aspect of the due diligence to make sure everything checks out. Because again, it's math. And no matter any way you skew it, 1 + 1 always equals 2. And so they find them, buyers spending way too much time on the numbers, when that should be the easiest part of the process. You have to look into other areas of the business related to the due diligence, the employees, the contracts, the customers, the suppliers, the market, the competition, etc. And all of those give you related to the business of what it was and what it can be. When you take all those components together, you start to paint the blanks, you start to fill in the picture. right? As opposed to just saying, well, the numbers look good, so that's okay. It's all these other pieces that are very, very important. And you not need to start your due diligence the second a business is of interest to you. So if you happen to find a business, for example, a distributor auto parts, and you have the initial contact with the broker or the seller and an initial conversation, once you understand what it is exactly that they sell, you have to start doing your due diligence immediately on the industry. Who are the competitors? What the industry look like? What are the industry being projected to be? Are there any 800-pound gorillas, meaning, big, large competitors that can easily put you out of business? What's this company's point of difference? So I apologize for the long-winded answer, but the point is so important that people, it needs to resonate with them, that the due diligence is a lot more than just the numbers. The numbers are a small part of it and the easiest part. It's everything else that is you're able to determine whether or not this is a good business going forward. What potentially can come bite you in the ass after you buy the business that can cause a problem for you. That's what you want to determine.
Thank you. What advice would you give to first-time buyers of businesses?
Well, if the stages of buying a business, the first thing is I tell them that they, even if they're just thinking about it, you owe it to yourself to investigate what's involved. Very often people sit on the sidelines. I've been doing this for 34 years and I've run seminars all over the world and have with buyers all over the world. And very often people will tell me, I've been thinking about buying a business for, all my life. Well, stop thinking about it and start doing, meaning just get into the process. You can learn about it, what's involved, what is it going to take, what type of businesses are out there. And then you could decide, you could look at a bunch of different things and then decide, but don't sit on the sidelines. Get involved, learn about it, do your homework, align yourself with some good mentors that can help you during the process. Above all, get educated and find out about it just to really understand what's involved, and people are going to be incredibly surprised how doable this is. I'm not a fancy kid. I grew up in a very middle-class background. I started off, with I bought my first business with $30,000, which in today's dollars is about $75,000. Doesn't take a ton of money. It's just a matter of get to the mix and start doing it.
Thank you. How important is it to have industry experience to buy a particular business?
Not important at all. Zero. Doesn't even count. Because remember, there's a complete difference between experience and expertise. Now, if it's a highly specialized industry that requires specific experience, that's one thing. But by and large, the majority of businesses, basic good business skills, and don't over-index about having to buy something in an industry that you're familiar with, because that's experience. It's not expertise.
Thank you. What's your advice for finding good businesses to buy?
Get the word out and speak to as many people as possible. It's easier to start off because there's publicly listed businesses for sale and business for sale databases, and those are typically a very good place to start. The majority of those businesses won't sell or don't sell. However, it's a terrific laboratory to be able to, for an individual to say, well, I think I'm interested in these 3 or 4 sectors. So it's a terrific laboratory for you to be able to go out and at those businesses and find out certain margins and percentages and speak with owners and get in front of owners. Our numbers, we have data going back decades. You need to speak with or meet with 40 sellers to get a business done, to get a business transaction done. And so get out, when starting out, use those business for sale databases, meet with sellers, speak to business owners, family, friends, people that that own businesses, ask them, for input, then take it at face value. Some people don't want to see you risk your future. And so family members typically are more tepid about the idea, but get yourself into the mix, go visit businesses, speak with owners of businesses, learn what's involved, understand what do you do every day, Mr. or Mrs. Seller? What keeps you up at night about the business? What is the best thing about the business, the worst thing about the business, etc.? And you could do all that using those business for sale websites as a laboratory. As you start to narrow down the type of business that makes sense, you may want to do some direct solicitations to specific companies. So it's you start off open-minded and wide, and like a shotgun, and you want to get down to a laser beam.
Thank you. Is it a good idea to buy businesses that don't have SOPs?
That don't have
standard operating procedures?
Oh, SOPs. Sorry, I thought you said SOTs. Yes, because most of them don't. So you have to be able to, formulate. I like to tell people ingredients are nothing without a recipe. So in other words, as long as it has the ingredients, if you can put the recipe together, you're going to be fine. And very often businesses, they don't have business plans. They don't have standard operating procedures. They simply they attained any of that level of sophistication, but that's a terrific opportunity.
Thank you. Are there any specific online platforms that you recommend for people to start looking for businesses to buy?
Yeah, the top business for sale websites. One, for example, you told me today you're actually into UK. So one of them is actually based in the UK. They have businesses listed all over the world, but that's businessesforsale.com, plural, businessesforsale.com. That's a terrific platform, and they break it down by various countries. Good information, good introduction. As far as being able to navigate the site, I find that to be a terrific site to work with. It's robust. The majority of businesses listed by business brokers are there, and businesses listed for sale by owner. So that's a very good platform and place to start.
Thank you. How can entrepreneurs approach business owners that have not placed their business on any platform, but they could be open to offers?
So one of our lessons in our course is why every business is for sale, and some don't even know it yet. Every business is for sale on the right condition. Doesn't mean you're going to overpay for it, of course, but reach out to people, especially as you go through this laboratory that we mentioned earlier. You start to define what type of business is right for you. Then you should do, if you haven't found it through an online database or business for sale or for your networking, is do a direct solicitation with a letter or phone call to these individuals and have the conversation. Every business is eventually going to sell or close. That's just the life cycle of a business. So getting in front of those people, there's no harm ever having those conversations. Just be wary. You don't want to start doing it through email. The best way to do it is phone call, an introduction if possible, but a phone call, a handwritten letter to those individuals and have the conversation. Because very often, maybe their business isn't for sale, but they know of someone else in the industry who is thinking about it, or it's something they haven't thought of. Well, I haven't really thought about that now, but I'd be interested in having the conversation. So it's just getting over the little bit of trepidation to not be afraid whatsoever to have the conversation. The other thing I encourage people to do is get into the habit of thinking like an entrepreneur. In other words, when you go into an owner-operated business, a dry cleaner, a hardware store, whatever case it may be, plumbing supply store near your a real estate office, a title agent, insurance agent, whatever it may be, wherever you encounter someone who is an owner-operator of that business, ask them questions. Hey, I'm thinking about potentially buying a business. How long have you owned this business? Is it something, would you do it over again? What do you like about business ownership? What don't you like? What about, entrepreneurship? Is it everything you thought it was going to be? For someone like me who's just thinking about it, what recommendations would you have? Do you know any businesses for sale? Like, you get yourself in the mind frame of being an entrepreneur. My wife always laughs because if I get out of the car and I go into somewhere like a dry cleaner or a florist or something to pick up, she knows I'm not coming out for an hour. I might buy the flowers or whatever in 10 minutes, but I'm speaking to the owner for 45 minutes having the conversation because I find it fascinating. And I really encourage people to have those conversations because they're enjoyable and they're really terrific learning moments. And you also never realize, how sometimes a potential target for an acquisition comes from a conversation.
Thank you. What are the worst mistakes entrepreneurs make that ensure the business fails after the purchase?
They try to do too much too soon. That is absolutely fundamental. When you see a failure happen, it's either one of two things. Either they realize that they're going to have to be part salesperson, or they try to do too much too soon. When you buy a business, the first day, you don't even know how to turn off the alarm. Yes, the seller will be there to train you and for a proper transition, but you typically know nothing. Think about this like going into this and saying, I know nothing. And you want to spend the first several months, 6 months, whatever time may be, to be able to get the guts of the business in your belly, because you can't make decisions until then. And employees will start to flip out. So you want to go in there very laid back and absorb as much knowledge as you can from the owner, from the employees, from the customers, from the suppliers. And then once you start to have a real understanding of the business, not just as an outsider, but as an insider, then you could start potentially making plans, putting in processes, systems, procedures, initiatives, etc. But you can't do that till you have the guts of the business in your belly.
Thank you. How can you manage the culture of the company, and how do you innovate to even make it even better compared to what culture there was before the sale?
The first part is understanding what the culture is, and some companies and smaller businesses don't really have a culture. I mean, it's just because everyone's just doing their job and going home. I find that the best way to do it, especially coming in as a newcomer, because you're going into a company as a new owner and there's the authority in place, is to shut up and listen for as long as possible, treat people very respectfully, and empower employees. People want to feel like they're contributing and empowering them. And very often the employees have terrific ideas that owners don't even listen to. It's so crazy. But empower the employees. And that doesn't mean just empowering the employees that are already there, because some employees are no good. You just got to get rid of them. So understand getting the right people into place is very important, but hire good people, hire the best people possibly can, and empower them, let them do their job. And that will really build a culture of people feeling like they're belonging, like they make a difference, like they're important, like they're contributing. And I find, for me anyways, my business is that culture happens by default when you empower people and your employees and let them make decisions for the areas that they're allegedly expert at doing.
Follow us for more interviews with world's most influential business titans, providing you with the insights to awaken to your full potential, so you can get paid to be yourself, find true happiness, and manifest anything you desire.